So how did this actually happen? How did they
ISIL is a terrorist organization.
ISIL.
ISIS, ISIL, IS, Daesh. These names all refer to the same militant group, the Islamic State. Call them what you want, but by summer 2014, they were known worldwide. They defy the stereotype of scattered terrorists hiding in caves. Parts of ISIS are organized like a light army, others as sophisticated terrorist cells. It's all aimed towards one goal, to redraw the map of the Middle East by creating a new state, an Islamic State.
Inshallah, we'll break the barrier of Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, all the countries.
So how did this actually happen? How did they capture massive amounts of territory across Syria and Iraq? This is the story of ISIS, how they built a 21st century terrorist organization, made it self-financing, and how they are now evolving under a new set of challenges. ISIS emerged in part from the ashes of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Its leader is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, an Iraqi preacher who fought in the insurgency. In 2004, he was captured by the U.S., but was considered insignificant enough that they released him. Baghdadi led his group to Syria, where they established a stronghold. Amid the chaos of the civil war, ISIS soon became the most powerful terrorist faction. The Syrian city of Raqqa became the group's capital by mid-2013. There they instituted real governance, establishing Sharia courts, taking over administrative buildings, even putting up street signs. To support this growing infrastructure, they focus on finances, taking control of oil resources and becoming systematic kidnappers. They have secured multi-million-dollar ransoms from many Western countries.
You want me to talk nice?
On the battleground, they're more professionalized than most of their competitors. ISIS's ranks include many officers as well as soldiers from Saddam Hussein's army who draw on decades of military experience. Another distinctive advantage is how ISIS used technology to woo fighters from all over the world, and in many languages. They're strategic online, using Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. They released videos featuring a captured British journalist hosting slickly produced talks, trying to convince Western audiences on the merits of jihad.
Over the next few programs, I'm going to show you the truth.
This kind of propaganda is working. ISIS now boasts about 3,000 foreign fighters from 80 countries.
I was like any other regular Canadian. I watched hockey.
Upon their return to Iraq in June 2014, their first major military victory was the fall of the country's second largest city, Mosul. It shocked the world. Then the militants quickly seized more Iraqi towns, encroaching on Baghdad. A second high-profile moment was the forcible expulsion of the Yazidis, a religious minority in Iraq. Some were killed, and more than 30,000 were forced to flee.
So 50,000 people, we estimate, are stuck in the mountains at this time.
Another key to their expansion is sheer brutality. There are the mass executions and unmarked graves of mostly fellow Muslims. Many reports of rape and of women being sold also continue to surface. ISIS's brutal tactics, with regular beheadings and the killings of civilians, were even criticized by Al-Qaeda's leadership, which formally severed ties in February. But since August 2014, resistance to ISIS grew. First, they were dealt a significant blow online. Social media sites, now more adept at spotting ISIS's videos, take them down almost immediately. Second, on the military front, an international airstrike campaign has slowed the group's advance.
America will lead a broad coalition to roll back this terrorist threat.
President Obama deployed more non-combat troops to Iraq in early November. And in Syria, where the headquarters remain, airstrikes have destroyed many oil refineries. Now, instead of storming into towns with a show of bravado, ISIS fighters move in small groups and rely on sleeper cells. Finally, a turning point came from some local tribes, villagers, and Iraqi troops who are banding together to push the group back. ISIS's momentum has stalled significantly since this summer, but they remain in control of large swaths of territory. The question is, under so much new pressure, how will they respond?
Good evening, brothers and sisters in Christ. This is another day for a World News Prophetic Update, July 18, 2015, and we only have about 10 pieces of news here, plus the video I just gave you. Shocking news about Iran and ISIS. Breaking Israel news here is Sanhedrin warns Pope Francis godly judgment may prove very risky. Woe to those who speak evil as good and of good as evil, who make darkness into light and light into darkness. Isaiah 5 verse 20. A recent Breaking Israel news article about the nascent Sanhedrin's intention to put Pope Francis on trial in absentia for his recognizing the Palestinian state has caused quite a ruckus. Though it may seem shocking to many that a group of rabbis would interfere in international policy or exert authority over the Pope, the Sanhedrin feels compelled to do so. Rabbi Dov Stein, the secretary of Sanhedrin, explained to Breaking Israel News that he feels it is their duty to bring God's law into this world. Thus far, the Vatican has not responded to the Sanhedrin's letter. As expected, no. It would seem that the Pope has chosen to ignore the letter, but a trial will be held anyway, and the result may be very risky for the Pope, Stein said. God in heaven is listening and obeys the Sanhedrin because the Torah interpretation is in the hands of the Sanhedrin here in this physical world, not in the heaven, in the hands of the angels. Now, for me, this is all sort of like bullpucky, because it is the Vatican who created Islam about 1600 years ago. Well, don't quote me on the time that it started, but approximately 400 to 600 AD, somewhere in that zone. And if you look into the account of Alberto Rivera, who was a Vatican Jesuit, and then he recanted his faith and became a Christian evangelist in the 60s. And his life was attempted 4 times by the Vatican. Finally, they succeeded on the 4th time by poisoning him. So anyway, if you look into that account of his story, he shares how the Vatican created Islam. At that time, they literally raised up Muhammad, brainwashed him as a little boy into believing that he was a prophet for this new religion called Islam. Anyway, believe it or not, I do. Now back to this news article. Not just a court for Jews. The rabbis on the Sanhedrin believe they are commanded by God to right injustice wherever it appears, regardless of religion or country. It has happened in the past that people have ignored the Sanhedrin, which is a mistake, because the Sanhedrin is vital to the proper functioning of the world. Only when the Jewish nation will heed the Sanhedrin of the Torah will the Torah be done. 1. Today, God's Torah is not the same Torah for all the Jews. Our unity is damaged because of this, because of people ignoring the Sanhedrin, Stein explained. In just one example, the Sanhedrin held a trial in 2008 against the Chinese government having to do with the persecution of the Falun Gong. Followers of Falun Gong, a branch of Buddhism, approached the Sanhedrin in 2007, claiming that their fellow practitioners in China were being persecuted. The claims, which has since been substantiated by media sources, were that in 1999 the Communist Party leadership declared Falun Gong a heretical organization and began systematically persecuting them with reported human rights violations. As of 2009, at least 2,000 Falun Gong practitioners had died as a result of abuse in custody. Some observers put the number much higher and report that tens of thousands may have been killed to supply China's organ transplant industry. The Chinese embassy tried to prevent it, but the Sanhedrin is not obligated to politics, only to justice, Stein said. The Chinese embassy in Israel was contacted by the Sanhedrin and responded that the hearing would likely have a negative effect on the diplomatic relations between Israel and China. Professor Hillel Wise, a member of the Sanhedrin, responded, "If Armenian representatives would have approached me and complained about the Turks, I would support opening a Sanhedrin trial against the Turks. Every regime needs to know that if it hurts another ethnic group, it is committing a crime." In 2008, the Sanhedrin ruled against China. The Association for Asian Research wrote about the judgment. While many nations and institutions have stayed silent as to the persecution of Falun Gong, the Sanhedrin has gotten it right. It's time for the world to respond. When asked what authority the Sanhedrin has to put foreign leaders and governments on trial, Stein explained the Sanhedrin is the Supreme Court with responsibility for the world. All of the people of the world should at least be following the Torah, even if it is only the 7 laws of Noah, which are incumbent on all non-Jews. The interpretation of the Torah in each generation is in the hands of the Sanhedrin. While the Sanhedrin's actions of trying Pope Francis in absentia has proven controversial, Stein reveals that the court has received international support for its cause. We have had many people contact us, Jews and Gentiles, and everyone was pleased with what we are doing and very supportive. They appreciate that there is now one true voice of the Jews and their Torah. And there is not even one Beit Din court of Jews who dare to say the truth in the world, he said. Moving on to the next bit of news from BBC News is Iraq violence. Car bombs kills scores in mainly Shia town. Footage shows a huge crater caused by the blast.
Those for Eid al-Fitr, one of the worst attacks targeting a residential crowded area in Iraq since the beginning of this year. People were shopping late at night after the end of the holy fasting month of Ramadan. Many of the dead included children and women. They were shopping to buy new clothes for Eid al-Fitr, which is one of the most important religious occasions on the Muslim calendar. Also, the governor of Diyala, Muthanna al-Tamimi, has announced 3 days of mourning, and also many of the public places in Diyala, like parks, amusement parks, are now closed for security concerns.
And next up from the Jerusalem Post, Khomeini, deal or no deal, Iran won't stop opposing U.S. supporting people of Palestine. Iran's supreme leader says death to America and death to Israel slogans chanted in Iran this week supporting the Palestinian cause show that what Iranians think. Supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khomeini withheld his verdict on Iran's nuclear deal on Saturday, but in a fiery address vowed enduring opposition to the United States and its Middle East policies, saying Washington sought Iran's surrender. In a speech at a Tehran mosque punctuated by chants of death to America and death to Israel, Khomeini said he wanted politicians to examine the agreement to ensure national interests were preserved, as Iran would not allow the disruption of its revolutionary principles or defensive abilities. An arch-conservative with the last word on high matters of state, Khomeini repeatedly used the phrase whether this text is approved or not, implying the court has yet to win definitive backing from Iran's fictionalized political establishment. Whether the deal is approved or disapproved, we will never stop supporting our friends in the region and the people of Palestine, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Bahrain, and Lebanon. Even after this deal, our policy towards the arrogant U.S. will not change, he said. Under the agreement reached on Tuesday, sanctions will be gradually removed in return for Iran accepting long-term curbs on a nuclear program that the West has suspected was aimed at creating a nuclear bomb. Iran denies it seeks a nuclear bomb. Right. That's why they want to wipe Israel and the U.S. off the map. Right. Khomeini's combative remarks about U.S. policies in the Middle East may sit awkward with a diplomatic offensive Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif plans in coming days in the wake of the deal. Insult. Iran regards its nuclear program as an emblem of national dignity and dynamism in the face of what it sees as decades of hostility from Western countries that opposed its 79 Islamic revolution. Khomeini did not echo criticisms of the deal made on Friday by a top cleric, Ayatollah Muhammad Ali Mavadi Khamenei, who said in his address broadcast on radio that it reflected excessive demands by world powers that were an insult. But Khomeini's remarks radiated a broad mistrust of U.S. intentions, claiming that successive American presidents had sought Iran's surrender and declaring that if war broke out, America would come off worse, nursing a broken head. The Americans say they stopped Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, Khomeini said. They know it's not true. We had a fatwa, religious ruling, declaring nuclear weapons to be religiously forbidden under Islamic law. It had nothing to do with the nuclear talks. He said the slogans of death to America and death to Israel, chanted at demonstrations in Iran this week supporting the Palestinian cause, showed what Iranians think and shook the atmosphere of the country. We have repeatedly said we don't negotiate with the U.S. on regional or international affairs, not even in bilateral issues. There are some exceptions like the nuclear program that we negotiated with Americans to serve our interests. He said U.S. policies in the region were 180 degrees opposed to Iran's policies. Legal path. He paid tribute to Iranian negotiators who thrashed out the accord in marathon negotiations in Vienna, saying their work was worthy of reward. Whether the deal was approved or not, added there was now a foreseen legal path in Iran for the nuclear agreement to take. Our expectation is that those involved will very carefully keep the issues of the country and national issues in mind, and what they present to the people they should also be able to present to God with their head held high. His remarks did not shed further light on Iran's procedures for ratifying the accord, which are not known in any detail. Zarif will brief Parliament on July 21st, Iranian media have said, and the agreement will also be examined the National Security Council, the country's highest security body. Zarif, who plans to visit several countries in the region, told fellow Muslim countries on Friday that Iran hoped that the accord could pave the way for more cooperation in the Middle East and internationally. Some Gulf Arab states have long accused Tehran of interference, alleging financial or armed support for political movements in several countries, including Bahrain, Yemen, and Lebanon. Shiite power Iran denies interference but vows undimmed support for the Syrian and Iraqi governments, both of whom are fighting insurgencies by a variety of Sunni armed groups. And the next bit of news, we need to move on here. Pro-Israel lobby backs group to fight Iranian nuclear deal. Another Iranian nuclear report. A powerful pro-Israel lobby is backing a new political group that on Friday launched a multi-million-dollar campaign to oppose the nuclear pact the United States recently made with Iran. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee is supporting an independent action committee called Citizens for a Nuclear-Free Iran, dedicated to preventing Iran from obtaining the capacity to obtain nuclear weapons. Spokesman Patrick Dorton said Friday that the group is launching a national TV and digital ad campaign in many media markets around the country. Democrats should be especially concerned because the deal increases the chance of war, will spur a nuclear arms race, and rewards an Iran with a horrific human rights record, Dorton said. The group's website lists an advisory board of 5 former Democratic and independent lawmakers. One time sends Evan Bayh of Indiana, Mark Bigich of Alaska, Mark Landrieu of Louisiana, and Joe Lieberman of Connecticut, along with former Representative Shelley Berkeley of Nevada. On the other side of the issue, liberal groups such as the Jewish Middle East Lobby, known as J Street, also are buying national ads to shore up congressional support for the deal. Those for and against the agreement, which gives Tehran billions of dollars in sanctions relief in exchange for curbing its nuclear program, are lobbying lawmakers who have not yet decided whether or not to support the deal. A vote in Congress is expected after the August recess. And from Yahoo News, shrinking U.S. Army increasingly stretched by global commitments general. That's just what we need, huh? The U.S. Army is far more heavily engaged around the world than projected when it began slashing force size several years ago, and its commitments will be hard to maintain in the long run as troop numbers shrink, General Ray Odierno said on Friday. Odierno, the Army Chief of Staff, said decisions about cutting the size of the force from 570,000 to the current 490,000 were made several years ago when Pentagon planners expected a peaceful Europe, a declining commitment in Afghanistan, and no return to Iraq. Instead, he said, the Army is regularly using three brigades in Eastern Europe because of concerns about Russia's support for rebels in Ukraine. It has another 3 brigades in Afghanistan, a brigade in Iraq, a brigade in Kuwait, and is rotating a brigade to South Korea, Odierno added. These are all pretty significant requirements. If they do not reduce, it will be hard for us to maintain that over a long period of time, he told reporters. Odierno, who is due to leave office in a few weeks, said he thought insecurity in Eastern Europe and the fight against Islamic State militants in Iraq and Syria were both long-term problems. He predicted defeating Islamic State could take 10 to 20 years, far longer than the administration has projected, but without some relief either in budget cuts or the breadth of commitments, the Army may not be able to sustain the pace. At some point, we're going to have to say what we're not going to do because we're not going to be able to do everything we're being asked to do right now, he said. Odierno said he had been warning for 2 years that tight budgets would require the Army to cut the active duty force to 450,000 troops from the current 490,000. He said he was surprised by the recent outcry when the service specified which bases would be hit in the coming years. We've been very clear that the Army will have to move down to 450,000 with the current budget we have, he said, noting that a further reduction to about 420,000 could be required if spending reductions continue. Isn't this just wonderful what Obama's doing to our military? It just keeps cutting it back more and more. Indonesia closes down 5 airports after volcanoes erupt. The natural disruption has caused travel chaos for thousands of travelers in the world's most populous Muslim-majority country trying to head home to celebrate Eid with their families. Ash streaming from 2 volcanoes has forced Indonesian authorities to shut 5 airports, leaving thousands unable to travel home for the Eid holiday. The closures were prompted by eruptions at Mount Rong at the main Java island and Mount Gamalama in eastern Indonesia. Mount Rong, which has been active for weeks, caused Denpasar Airport on the Indonesian island of Bali to close last week. Fresh eruptions took place on the eve of Friday's Eid festival, which marks the end of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Mount Rong on the main island of Java blasted ash and debris up to 2,000 or 6,560 feet into the air after rumbling for several weeks, and Gamalama Mountain in eastern Indonesia erupted Thursday after months of quiet. And the earthquakes in diverse places and volcanoes just doesn't quit. The terrible weather. And next up from Yahoo News, tsunami threat canceled after magnitude 6.9 quake in South Pacific. From Sydney, Australia, a tsunami threat was canceled Saturday after a strong earthquake struck the Santa Cruz Islands in the South Pacific and no damage or casualties were reported. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center said the quake measured 6.9, down from a preliminary magnitude of 7.5. It hit at a depth of 20 miles and was centered undersea 75 kilometers or 47 miles. Northwest of Lata in the eastern Solomon Islands, where the Santa Cruz Islands are located. Reporting from Canada Free Press, Iran has now out-pioneered even North Korea in the art of nuclear extortion. As Congress embarks on its 60-day review of the Iran deal, it would be wise to consider not only the implications for Iran and the Middle East, but for a world. Nuclear extortion, pioneered by North Korea, perfected by Iran. With implications reaching far beyond the Middle East, the Iran nuclear deal opens the gates not to a safer world, but to proliferation. Move that over a little bit. Sorry about that. On a scale likely to defy any peaceful efforts at containment. With a fatally flawed bargain announced Tuesday in Vienna, the U.S. and its negotiating partners have underscored big time the sorry lesson of the series of failed nuclear deals that helped sustain North Korea's regime all the way to the bomb. In a game of nuclear chicken, the U.S. will flinch. In the post-Cold War era, nuclear blackmail works. Iran had before it the example of North Korea's successful nuclear extortion. Now comes the example of Iran. Welcome to the mafia world, in which the rules of the game increasingly favor the worst actors and penalize the most decent. That message will be read into this deal not only by Iran's near neighbors, but by nations around the globe, from Asia to Africa to Latin America. Consider the astounding spectacle played out at the Marathon Iran talks, which the White House is now spinning as an historic success, having already offered concessions including temporary easing of sanctions merely to achieve the interim deal that brought Iran to the main bargaining table. 6 world powers then spent 20 months negotiating with Tehran, overrunning half a dozen self-imposed deadlines in desperate quest of a deal. On one side of the table were the U.S., France, Britain, Russia, China, and Germany. All accepted Germany are major nuclear powers with veto-wielding seats on the Security Council. Combined, they wield economic and military heft on a scale that utterly dwarfs that of Iran. So, for that matter, does the U.S. all by itself? On the other side of the table was Iran, a despotism under international sanctions, wielding one basic implied threat, that if the offers and concessions of the world powers did not suffice, Tehran would walk away from the talks and carry on toward becoming a nuclear-armed state. The U.S., de facto leader of the assembled world powers, went into these talks promising that any deal struck would ensure Iran does not get the bomb. In the name of that goal, President Obama was willing to lie and cheat and to ignore Iran's record as the world's leading state sponsor of terror, its arms smuggling and nuclear cheating even during the talks, its gross abuses of human rights at home, its push to dominate the Middle East, its threats to annihilate Israel, and its officially celebrated chants of death to America. Iran emerged from the talks with concessions that secure it a place as a nuclear threshold state, enrich its regime, enhance its nuclear expertise. At best, defer the day it is likely to achieve nuclear weapons breakout, and in the interim make it easier for Iran to cheat, in which case it could achieve nuclear breakout much sooner. These concessions include the lifting of a nuclear-related sanctions, access to upwards of $100 billion in frozen oil revenues, and the prospect of hundreds of billions more of an oil-rich Iranian regime free to re-enter world markets. Via this deal, Iran obtains the right to enrich uranium and keep thousands of centrifuges it was forbidden to acquire in the first place. Iran also gets to manage the access of international inspectors and engage with international assistance, no less, in nuclear procurement and research. The deal comes with major sunset clauses 10 and 15 years out. The army embargo on Iran is to be lifted in 5 years, the missile embargo in 8, regardless of whether Iran's Islamic Republic carries on, as it has since 1979, as a terror-sponsoring messianic tyranny seeking the destruction of Israel and ruin of America. And from Newsmax, Franklin Graham Iran deal, death sentence for Israel. Franklin Graham, son of famed evangelist preacher Billy Graham, is calling for prayers for Congress as it debates a nuclear proliferation deal with Iran, and says he agrees with Donald Trump's belief any deals should have demanded the release of 4 Americans being held prisoner. President Barack Obama is heralding his nuclear deal with Iran as another chapter in the pursuit of a more helpful and more hopeful world. I don't think so. Iran has a history of funding terrorism around the world, and they are Israel's worst enemy. We are alienating our decade-long allies and cozying up to their enemies and ours. And Donald J. Trump was exactly right when he said, we have 4 prisoners over there. We should have said, let the prisoners out. One of these prisoners is our friend Pastor Saeed Abedini. And I haven't heard the names of any of these 4 U.S. citizens mentioned in the negotiations with Iran. Some are calling this deal a potential death sentence for the state of Israel. Pray for our Congress that God would give them wisdom as they debate this important agreement. There's a lot at stake here. Pray that President Obama is impeached. Obama faces tough sales job in Congress as critics blast capitulation in Iran. To Iran. Excuse me. And the last bit of news for the day. Motorists flee as a wildfire races across California freeway.
Freeway and the images that had so many people transfixed. Eyewitness News reporter Leticia Juarez live along Interstate 15 in the Cajon Pass with an update on the massive traffic jam there and those vehicles destroyed by the fire. Leticia.
Of Interstate 15 still slow going, only 3 lanes open. The 2 left lanes remain closed as fire crews continue to remain here on the scene. I'm standing where the fire originated this afternoon and quickly went uphill where there was standstill traffic. Motorists literally had seconds to escape their vehicles when the flames came at them. An intense and quick-moving brush fire overtook vehicles on Interstate 15 this afternoon. Windy conditions in the Cajon Pass helping to push the north fire from northbound lanes uphill towards stop-and-go traffic on southbound lanes. Drivers say they ran for their lives as flames crossed over the highway.
Saw the flames, they told us to get out and run. We ran up the hill.
I just grabbed my kids and just ran up the hill. Everyone was screaming. Cars were on fire, blowing up. It was pretty bad.
Air 7 capturing these dramatic images as a helicopter dropped water on vehicles below. It did little to stop the massive blaze. On the ground you can see this semi-truck engulfed. Russell Aliveto, vacationing in California with his family, says the fire was something out of a nightmare.
All of a sudden, a huge fire just started coming over the road, burning all the cars. People were running up the hill. Older people couldn't walk. They were dragging them up the hill. It was just a nightmare.
Motorists huddled in groups alongside the highway and watched as firefighters battled the blaze. Ground crews with the help of air support got the vehicle fire out, but not before it ignited an out-of-control wildfire. The fire growing from 50 acres to over 3,000 acres in a matter of 2 hours. Fire officials say their efforts hampered briefly by drones.
The one thing that did hamper our operations today is that we had 5 drones in the airspace when the aircraft arrived. 3 of the drones quickly landed. 2 continued to hamper firefighting operations, so they had to temporarily cease the aircraft side of the wildland firefighting for between 15 and 20 minutes.
In all, 20 vehicles destroyed, but some people did return to find their cars and trucks spared.
Terrified. And then look how close I am to one. Actually, they said that they tried to save my car, which I really appreciate.
You're glad to get out of here?
Very glad.
So you were here when the fire came up?
Yes.
Tell me, what was going through your mind?
At first, it was a little, okay, it's going to get taken care of, it will be put out, but then as it started to get closer and closer, just panic and kind of...
So you then did what?
Got out and started running up the hill. And Caltrans says tonight the southbound lanes do remain closed to all traffic. They did receive some structural damage to the southbound lanes where those cars and semi and those boat actually destroyed some of that lanes there. They said they're going to have to repair those lanes overnight. Tomorrow by early morning they plan to have the 1, 2, and 3 lanes back open. The 4th lane will remain closed for fire activity there. Reporting live from the northbound lanes of the Interstate 15, Leticia Juarez, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.